Hey, what is up guys? Eric Thane here from Cinema Mastery, and we are back with another cinematography breakdown. Haven't done one of these in a little while, and you guys used to always really like them, so I figured why not jump back into it. Only we're going to do things a little bit differently today. Instead of breaking down something that I shot, I'm going to be breaking down some scenes from The Batman, which was an incredible movie. The cinematography is just absolutely incredible. So I pulled a few stills from it that I want to take a look at, and we're just going to kind of break down what's going on with the lighting and what it looks like. So let's go ahead and jump into it. First things first with this breakdown, I want to make sure that it is known that I don't feel like I am in any way, shape, or form qualified to be telling you how the Batman was lit. This is obviously shot by Greg Fraser, who is one of the best DPs in the world. Certainly one of my favorite DPs. At the top of the industry right now, he is shooting some incredible, incredible stuff. And honestly, I think that the cinematography of the Batman is probably some of the best, if not the best, cinematography ever. That is my opinion. I just think it is absolutely phenomenal. It's crazy what he did here. I love how dark it is and how dirty the frame is and how everything. It's just so awesome. So this is really great. Just to be warned from the very beginning, I haven't looked at any like behind the scenes photos or videos or footage or anything like that. So I don't know how this was lit. I don't know what gear they were using or anything like that. And that's actually on purpose because I don't really like the reviews where you go in and you go, well, they used this here and then this piece of gear here and that kind of thing. What happens is when filmmakers see that, they tend to think like, oh, well, I need that camera and that light and that diffusion. But the reality is that everything that I'm going to be showing you here can be done with like household items or with cheaper gear, because it's not about the gear, it's about the techniques that you use to get these looks. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to be analyzing these frames and just looking at it, and we're going to be looking for the light. Where's the light coming from? What does it look like? What's the quality of the light? How is it working? What is probably going on there, and how are they creating that, and how can you create that, more importantly, at home with the gear that you have? Because ultimately, I think as a cinematographer, that is one of the most powerful skills that you can learn, is the ability to analyze a frame and to be able to extrapolate from that frame what is going on so that you can replicate it in your own work. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into a few of these awesome frames from the Batman. Okay, so with our first frame here, you're gonna notice right off the bat, we are looking at some very dark cinematography. That is kind of gonna be the theme of this video, because when you think of the Batman and the cinematography of the Batman, you think dark, right? It's very dark. It is probably some of the darkest cinematography out there, as in like really dim light levels. And honestly, personally, I just love that about it. I love the way that Greg Fraser's worked with the shadows here and brought out this richness in the shadows, because even though it's dark, it doesn't feel underexposed, right? We still feel like there's plenty of exposure there. Like watching it in the theater, I never noticed that it was too dark or that I couldn't see anything. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about why that is. But in this first shot, we've got a few different light sources going on here. So number one, obviously we can see our key light on our main talent here coming from this direction. We've got some practicals. There's a couple of lamps in the background there, and then one up here in the right corner. And so we've got some practicals going on, and there's one other light source that I'm seeing here that is kind of this soft blue. You can see a little bit of it on this guy's head. You can see a little bit of it on his glove right here, even a little bit on this guy's forehead as well. So there's a little bit of a blue coming down. So let's kind of figure out what's going on here. So for our key light, we've obviously got some nice motivated light coming from this lamp. Okay, motivated by the lamp. So it looks like the light is coming from that lamp, but in reality, we probably have something like a 4x4 diffusion frame with a light source behind it that is giving us this light on his face here. Now, the reason why this is so important is because we want this light to be motivated so that it looks like it's coming from that lamp. But if you really pay attention to it, that lamp is actually behind him, so it wouldn't be wrapping all the way to the front side of his face. You can see a little bit of light there. And so what we're using is a little bit of diffusion and a light source here to wrap that light around his face so we get a little bit more. Otherwise, we just have like a little kicker on the side of his face, kind of like what we're getting here. See? So we're wrapping that light using a tungsten source to match the tungsten quality of this lamp here. And using something, you'll notice that there's a nice soft gradation across his forehead. It's not a hard line, which shows us that there's a little bit of diffusion in front of it. So I'm guessing something like a 4x or something like that that's just outside of frame here, and we're using a light to wrap that around. Now, obviously we have some practicals in the background. Those are just being controlled on a dimmer so we can get them at the levels that we want. And then let's talk real quickly about this blue light. So This here, this blue light you're seeing on this guy's head, and then over on this guy's forehead, on the glove as well, even a little bit on his collar here. So this is a light that is motivated by the outside light. So we've got kind of a nice like orange and blue color contrast going here, which are complementary colors, obviously, so that's gonna create a nice color contrast in your scene. And so if you look at other shots from this scene, you'll notice that the windows over on this side of the room have this blue light going on outside because it's nighttime. We're kind of motivating moonlight coming through the window. And so it's gonna be a somewhat soft moonlit look, as if there's just moonlight coming through that window. So the way this is being achieved is most likely some sort of diffusion frame up high, a big one, probably, considering how soft this light is. Although it's not, I guess it's not like extremely soft. If you look at the line between the light and the shadow on his glove here, it's not wrapping all the way around. We've got a little bit of a line there, so it may not be really that soft. Maybe it could be just like a 4x up here. So we've got a blue light source, daylight balanced or somewhere around there, maybe something like a sky panel or something like that. That's just like a panel light, and then we've got some diffusion up high, up above our talent. And considering the direction of it, I'm guessing it's kind of like this at this angle. Okay, so that's what's going on there in terms of the lighting. Now you notice that, like I said, we're really dark. These skin tones, I'm not looking at a meter right now, but I'm guessing these aren't coming in more than like 30 or 40% IRE. This is a really, really dim scene. And I think the key takeaway from this is like, don't be afraid of going dark in your scenes. Like if it makes sense, it's okay for things to be dark. I think a lot of filmmakers starting out are afraid to make things dark. You see a lot of people talking about how like your histogram has to be right in the center, right? And you've got to have good exposure and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that, you know, there's a lot of movies that are shot really dark, right? And even the brightest spots in this scene are not even like close to clipping or pretty dim as well. So the question is though, if you're going to shoot dark like this, then how do you get a scene that looks, you know, properly exposed, that doesn't look underexposed? And the key really is to have a good range of shadows and highlights. So even though we've got a lot of shadow in this scene, it is mostly shadow, and we've got our skin tones in a very, you know, mid-range and even low mid-range, the reason why this doesn't look underexposed is because precisely we have these practicals in the background that are closer to the top of the range. And so what that's doing is it's giving us an overall look that is a good range of values from shadow into highlight, instead of just having everything be dark. If you didn't have these, if you scratch those out and all of this, and it was just this, if you can imagine, you put your hands in front of it and just, you know, look at it, it would actually look like a dark, kind of underexposed scene. And so it's because of those practicals that it feels that way. So when you're shooting your stuff, you know, pay attention to that. If you've got a dark scene, one really easy way to make it feel not underexposed is to add some practicals, add some bright highlights into the scene to help even out your range of values. All right, so moving on to the next scene. This is another really cool shot with some interesting lighting going on. So we've got basically two light sources, not counting this practical in the background here. But on these guys, we've got this red happening on top of their heads, and then of course in the background as well, on their shoulders here. And then we've got this really soft light happening on their foreheads, just kind of coming down from above. So what's happening here, and the reason why I pulled this one out is it's really interesting to pay attention to positioning of the light. And so top lighting can actually be really interesting, and it can be really flattering if you diffuse it so that it's soft, and if you make sure that it's positioned correctly. So currently this main light, this key light I would call it, that's hitting them here, the kind of warmer, more tungsten light, what's going on there is that we've got it up above them like this, but it's actually pushed a little bit back behind their heads, which is causing us to get this shadow underneath their eyes. Now, if you pulled that forward a little bit more, let's say you were doing something like this, but you were going for a less moody, less dark vibe, you can actually bring that forward a little bit and let some of that light go into the eye sockets, and it'll give you a little bit more light in those eyes and make it a little bit less moody. So if you're going for a similar effect, that you wanted this kind of like flattering look, but without the darkness of it, you could do that. But in this case, because it's the Batman, of course, we're going dark. So we've got this pushed back enough so that their eye sockets are in shadow. There's a very light, soft catch light in his eye there, which is kind of interesting, hard to see. And so we've got that light kind of happening. There's actually, now that I'm looking at it, I didn't notice this earlier, there's actually a couple different lights going on here. So we have a warmer light, it looks like. See, this hitting the back of his head is a little bit warmer. And then this hitting this side of his head, there's a little bit warmer right there. So I'm guessing there's actually a light source back here as well. Something really soft and diffused, really dim, hitting that. And then of course we've got this overhead light right there. And looking at that reflection on his nose, it honestly looks like a tube light. So that could be actually a fluorescent tube or a quasar or a Titan tube or something like that up above them. It's kind of hard to tell looking at the nose reflections, but could be something like that that is just coming down on them and then giving us that really soft, nice overhead light. And then of course we've got this red light going on in the background. Considering the placement of it, I'm guessing it's somewhere over here. It's hitting this guy's head and this guy's head, just giving us a nice little overhead lit look. If you look at the scene in the movie, the whole place is basically lit up with red. There's just red light everywhere. This scene was obviously custom lit for this specific scene to not have the red just flooding everywhere, because that wouldn't look as good. So what we're doing is we're taking that red light and moving it behind the talent just to give them a little bit of a rim around them, to create some color separation between the red and then the natural, more natural skin tones that are hitting their skin. Okay, so moving on to this scene, it's a little bit hard to tell what's going on here, but basically we're shooting the camera through a window into a couple of actresses here that are inside the room. We've got basically just practical lights going on in this scene. So we've got a practical over here, something that is lighting up this area. It may not be a practical, I guess it's not in the shot, but something's just lighting up this area over here. We've got the TV on, which is acting as a practical light, and then just like kind of a couple of practical lamps in the background there. Now there's one other source that is hitting both of our subjects from this side, so there's something soft over here, again, diffused, that is hitting that. But overall, like, just again, very dim lighting, mostly practical lighting, very simple lighting. You'll find that most of the lighting in this movie is actually really simple. There's not a lot going on, and that helps it to feel natural, and it helps it to feel the way it does, and so it's kind of cool. The one thing that I really wanted to point out about this scene that I think is really neat is that the way we're shooting through these windows is really interesting, but notice all this texture on the windows. So we've got this rain happening. It seems like the whole movie is actually shot while it's raining, right? Which helps give it that kind of dingy vibe. It's a really cool image of Gotham that way. But it's also something that you can do on your shoots, is that if you're ever shooting through a window like this and you want to create more texture on the window, we actually did a shoot a little while back with Jake McGee, who's one of our crew members, and we did a shot like this where we were looking through a window and we needed some more texture on it, so we just took a spray bottle and sprayed the window right above where the camera was so that we had water running down on the window to create that effect. And so then you get this little bit of texture on the window, which gives you kind of a cool grungy vibe, but it also just gives you some texture on those windows so everything's not so clean. And that's another really big theme of this movie, is that the dirtying of the frame, just making things not perfect. They actually took some anamorphic lenses and detuned them to make them less sharp, to make them dirtier, to make them softer, blurrier, in order to create the look of this film. And I think that's a really interesting choice. Something that you can also think about when you're shooting your films is, how can I dirty up the frame? How can I make things a little bit dirtier, add, raindrops to the window? Or another thing they did actually that I read about is that Greg Fraser took Vaseline and put it on his lens so that the way that the light would reflect off of it would create these really cool reflections. So be thinking about that. Everything doesn't have to be so clinical, so perfect all the time. In fact, a lot of times I think it's more fun to just like make things dirty and make them more unique. So this next frame I pulled actually just to further the discussion on dirtying up the frame. So here's a really good example of this. You can see all this bokeh happening, and this is light reflecting off of the lens in this car scene with the penguin here. And this is probably coming from either the lens was wet, had water drops on it, or had Vaseline on it or something that is causing the light to refract off the lens like that, which is a really cool effect. And then, outside of that, in this scene, we've got a warm light source here, we've got a red light source here, and then there's something in front of the talent here as well, because we can see it in his eye light there. So just a few light sources, and this is pretty typical car lighting. He's in the car in this scene, and it's usually, for scenes like this, a dark car scene is usually just a combination of like greenish fluorescence, sodium vapors, orangish style lights, and then some red lights to motivate like stop lights or brake lights or that kind of thing. And so if you're shooting a car scene and you're doing close-up shots like this, we're not showing too much of the outside, a really easy way to do it is just to add in a combination of like tungsten and sodium vapor and red lighting coming through from different angles, and you can get a really convincing scene that looks like your talent is in a car. Okay, so in this scene we've got Batman, Robert Pattinson down here spraying some stuff on the floor, and there's a few really interesting things happening here as well. So first thing we'll notice is that we've got blue light coming through the windows, so we've got something lit on the outside. Either there's haze or rain or something, and we're lighting that to just, it's not direct light coming through the windows, it's more like just we want the outside to be blue, and so we've lit the outside. And it could be CGI, it could be an LED wall, which they did use on this movie, and so may not be actually a practical effect, but that's how you would do it. The thing that I would point out here is that notice that we still have a little bit of texture in the windows, because like the other scene, we've got some raindrops on the windows to create that texture. And so it's making it so that we can't just see outside, and which would make it distracting. It's putting that texture in front of it, that kind of more that hazy look, which is making it, helping us draw our eyes towards the talent that's going on here. Now, we've got some practicals here. So there's a lamp there, we've got a lamp bulb there, and it's kind of cool how this is knocked over and exposing that lamp. And then we've got another lamp over here. And then we've got this fireplace, okay? So we're using the fire as a practical. And what's interesting about this is that this is how we know that this wasn't being shot. See, a lot of times filmmakers will say, well, you just light everything really light, and then they're pulling down the exposure in post. But we know they're not doing that because that fireplace is so bright. The only way for that fireplace to be that bright is for them to actually be working with dim levels. Which is really interesting because that didn't used to be a thing. In movies, 10, maybe even 5 years ago, before LEDs were really a thing, everything had to be lit bright, right? Because cameras didn't have the ability to go as dark as they do now. So you had to give the camera a lot of exposure, and then you had to work with like bringing the exposure down in post and making everything look right. But nowadays with LEDs and with cameras that are like super sensitive and can capture all of those deep shadow information, now you can actually shoot with really low levels. And so this is lit really dim. We've got the lamps dimmed down, we've got the lights dimmed down, and you can tell because that fireplace is so bright. If this was lit really bright and exposed for really bright lights, then the fireplace wouldn't be as bright. So we've got that fireplace going on, and then we've got this nice blue light coming over top of him. Maybe you're seeing a theme here that's very similar to the first scene that we looked at. And then the other thing I want to point out is these really cool reflections happening on the floor. So be paying attention to that while you're shooting as well. It's like, where can I find those reflections? Those can add a lot to your scene. For the most part, it seems like this scene is being lit by our practicals here, at least the background. But you will notice that there is a little bit of light here. You can see it on his arm happening right there. So we do have a warm source over here coming this direction. And so again, probably just like a 4x4 diffusion frame. We got some light coming this way, just giving us a little bit of that fill on him right here so that we can see him. We don't want the shadows to be black. We don't want them crushed. We want to have some detail in those shadows. And so we're getting that with those. And then with this blue light on top, again, same thing. Up above, we've got a nice diffusion frame with a sky panel or something like that, pushed a little bit back behind him. So it's not in front, it's back behind him a little bit, because notice it's hitting here, but it's not coming onto this side of him. And then it is hitting on this side, and it's hitting over here, which means it's pretty big. So we've got it, probably about that size, which means it's probably it could be 4x4, probably a 6x6, something like that that's going on up there that's giving us that nice blue light on him. Helps separate him from the background, but then again, giving us that color contrast and motivating that window light, that moonlight coming through the window. Okay, and moving on to the last scene here. One of the coolest scenes, I think, in the movie. This is awesome. So we've got our villain sitting here in the prison cell. And the really interesting thing about this one is that I looked at a few different angles from this scene and to really figure out what was going on. And what I realized is that I believe this scene is actually being lit with just one light, which I love scenes like that. It happens more often than you would think in Hollywood. This happens a lot. And you can actually see the light right here in his glasses. So we've got that reflection right there. And the reason we know that there's not any other lights going on is because if there were, we'd be able to see them in his glasses. And so these back here are actually, after looking at a couple different angles, these are actually reflections of that light. Those aren't lights in the background. There's something on the wall here that is reflecting that light that is coming from this tube light up above him. So we've got a quasar or a Titan tube or something like that up here above him. And then again, the positioning is such that we're getting the light hitting the front of his face. So this is a good example of that previous scene where we saw their eye sockets were in shadow. This is what it looks like if you bring that tube light a little bit more forward and you fill in those eye sockets with light. It makes it a little bit less dramatic, but we are positioning it this way because we've got this nice light breaking right here. So we're getting reverse key lighting, right? So it's technically coming from the reverse side of his face and then breaking right on the corner of this face, which we always talk about, that is creating that really nice reverse key light. Our shadows are towards the camera, and we're getting some really beautiful lighting there. So we've just got that one light up above him, up here somewhere. You can see it there. Again, it's reflecting off the background and then hitting his face here. And that's really all you need. If you've got a tube light like this and you can dim it down to the right levels or get your exposure right, they can produce some really nice soft light like what we're seeing here. So that's what's happening there. All right, you guys, so there's our breakdown of some of the cinematography from the Batman, which is absolutely incredible. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked it, let me know down below, and I will do more of these. And if you're a filmmaker who wants to learn how to do more lighting like this and to create really truly cinematic looking images, whether you're shooting, movies like this, or if it's commercials or real estate videos or even weddings, I want to invite you to check out my free training down below. It'll be in the description. It's an hour long. It's totally free. You can check it out. I'm going to go through my top 10 cinema hacks that I use to get cinematic looking images every single time. And I'll walk you through the entire process and show you how it's done. And at the end of the video, if you are interested in learning more, we do have our Cinema Mastery program, which will take you in depth into learning lighting and editing and composition and camera settings and everything that you need to know to create really cinematic looking films. So take a look at that down below. Hope you guys enjoy it. If you have any questions about this, feel free to post them in the comments. I will take a look and we will see you on the next video.